when you look at that archive and you go, I'm not crazy, stupid, lazy, or dumb, the money doesn't really matter after a certain sort of baseline. This is potentially just an editorial or a reflection. A lot of people think that Steve Jobs built the Apple computer, and it's actually not true. Another person actually built the Apple computer. That was Steve Wozniak. Steve Jobs built the profit behind it and the company and the marketing and the packaging and all that stuff, but it really was a different engineer that did the engineering for the product. So it wouldn't exist without Steve Wozniak. One of the ways to look back on an engineering career, whether you're doing this at year 5 or year 20 or year 50, it's the world isn't always fair with compensation. You don't always make the best decisions in terms of investment, but if you can look back at a catalog of projects that you worked on and go, did I ever write, in terms of value for a company, in terms of value for the engineering community at large, did I ever write $1 million piece of code? Did I ever write a 3 or a 5 or a 10 or a $20 million piece of code? And if the answer is yes, even if you're not living in a mansion at age 50 or driving a Porsche, if the answer is yes at significant points in your career, I'm talking to myself obviously, and this sort of sounds like tooting my own horn, but it's really about aligning this sort of community value of what you worked on from the perspective of the engineering community rather than the perspective of the marketing community. So what is the contribution in terms of the Steve Wozniak contribution versus the Steve Jobs contribution? I imagine that Jobs went through much of his later life, as people were saying he invented Apple Computer, feeling a little bit like a fraud, or a lot like a fraud, knowing that he basically didn't, and he just did the marketing thing for it. So as the world beats you down at age 50 or whatever, and you go, I'm not really sure I have enough to retire on, I'm not really sure I can get my next role because hiring is ageist, and maybe you got laid off, or maybe you had to experience burnout or whatever, to align the sort of real value of what you've contributed versus the bullshit sort of capitalistic value is important. In this, again, in the sense that, at one point I was making whatever the dollar amount was a year as an engineer, but if I really objectively look at that project, it was the core code for 6 or 10 or 12 contracts that would not have shipped without that core code. At other points I was maintaining a system on a team that was worth millions and millions of dollars to people. So even now, if it's like I drive a Kia, I don't drive a Porsche, I live in a very modest condo, I don't live in a mansion, I don't have a yacht, but I can, if I align my sense of value, my sense of worth and integrity, rather than listening to the external world saying, why don't you have a Rolex? If I really look at sort of it from the framework of how did Wozniak, or how does Wozniak feel about his own contribution, aside from any comparison to the Maserati driving class, etc. And yeah, it's really important to keep records and to kind of have an archive or a journal or a file folder, a list that you can look back on, and when it does get tough, when it's like, why am I struggling to pay this hospital bill, or why does it seem like the world just fundamentally doesn't value me as a 50-year-old, a 60-year-old, a 70-year-old engineer, to go, I've already made my nut on some level in terms of contributing to the world in terms of making value for companies, you know, it's not about the money for me. It's about, you certainly, you want a certain sense of security, you want your health, you want to lower stress, you want the relationships that sustain you. But really, when you have to turn the lens on yourself and go, do I feel successful? You need that archive to go, actually, that project was really significant to the following people. That project was really significant to the following people. That GitHub repo, in the number of times it was forked or starred, even though I don't really know tangibly, seems to have been, foundational for a fair number of people. So, don't look at it in terms of net worth. Don't look at it in terms of the brand of your car. As Dave Ramsey says, the car brand is just the car loan that the guy is driving around. It doesn't mean anything. If you really can look back at a body of work and use that to keep you motivated going forward, that's where the real value is. It's really about integrity, not fraudulence. It's about making an actual contribution versus selling an actual contribution. And those are two different things. Just add a little footnote here, which is, as a 50-year-old engineer looking at being a 60 or a 70-year-old engineer, you fundamentally have to do this perspective shift, because if I just jump into the job pool right now, there's literally zero chance or almost literally zero chance that I'm going to find remuneration as a 50-year-old engineer. That doesn't speak to a person's value. That speaks to an out of whack, ecosystem. It speaks to an out of whack cultural value of how we value older people, older engineers, right? I have this catalog of work that can keep me standing upright a little bit in order to keep going, to keep making things that are still of value, even if they're not, enriching my pocket. Like, you don't know if you write a prototype for something or a piece of modular code or a project and you publish it. It's one thing to sell it. Like, the pipe dream is you sell it, right? You make $1 bazillion on your brilliant piece of code, and everybody lives happily ever after. And that just doesn't really happen. But if you do keep working and keep putting your work out there, even despite what the hiring market says, you're still making a contribution. It's not, this is not rainbows and butterflies, me blowing sunshine up my own tuchus. It's basically saying, at no point in my career have I really been, forget, let me not answer that in a sentence, but at no point in my career has it really been about, making $1 bazillion. It's about being able to look yourself in the mirror, and the mirror for me is, my journals, my notes, my GitHub, my folder of accomplishments and work, to go, I don't know what more I could have done, right? This is clearly not the archive of a lazy person. This is clearly not the archive of a crazy, delusional person. This is not the archive of a stupid person. I don't know. When you look at that archive and you go, I'm not crazy, stupid, lazy, or dumb, the money doesn't really matter after a certain sort of baseline. And look, I have a really nice, 1-bedroom, 750 square foot condo, a car that works, and friends, and my health and my sanity. I'm not struggling under the stress of, being a code monkey for a corporation anymore. I'm able to pick and choose the projects I want to work on. And I think as long as I keep going, doing those projects is core to maintaining mental health. It's core to maintaining my sense of value, and just not worry about, the the value in the worry about the value in the market. Like, is this thing of value? But that's different from your own remuneration for that thing, right? It's like you can write something or put out something of tremendous value and not see, sort of equitous remuneration for it. So if you change one person's outlook, if you support somebody's project with a piece of code, if you give them a smile when they're down, or in this message, give a 50-year-old programmer a little ray of light in terms of, someone who loves coding but can't figure out how to fit it into the culture that doesn't value them. It's really not about the paycheck you receive. It's about the value you create.